Welcome, dear listeners and our lovely navigators. Remo back here again, and this month we have a special treat for all of us. We have two guests this time. I'll be interviewing and conversing with. Um, we could say the seeders, underpinnings, bridges, fairy and godmothers, and the heart space of us new Paradigm Navigators. So first, we have Joan Walton, who's an academic in the School of Education at York St. John's University, teaching research methods on the master's program and supervising doctoral students. She's particularly interested in exploring the ontological and epistemological contexts within which approaches to research are located. This has led to her taking an active interest in the phenomenon of consciousness. She draws on a wide range of disciplines: quantum physics, consciousness studies, transpersonal psychology, and diverse spiritual traditions to inform her research. Joan started this project together with Louise, who I'll be introducing next, in heart-centered inquiry and offers us general support. Hi, Joan.
Hi, Remo. Really good to be here and to speak with you.
I'm honored to have you. It took a little while to catch you, get a hold of you, but here we are. And I'll be introducing Louise, our fairy mother. She's the director of the Heart Sense Research Institute and co-founder of the Center for Myth, Cosmology, and the Sacred. She has a doctor's from Canterbury Christ Church University and a Master's of Science in Holistic Science from the Schumacher College. Her research explores the heart's role in navigating conflict, drawing on transformational learning, depth psychology, holistic science, cultural history, esoteric wisdom, and religious philosophy. And she's our fairy mother, like I said, who together with Joan dreamed this project into being through heart-centered inquiry and is also offering us overall support and in work and event support. So welcome. I'm honored to be talking with you today. Hi, Louise.
Hi, Remo. Lovely to be here with you.
So this episode, I thought we would explore a little bit the underpinning frameworks, maybe even a little bit of philosophy, and of course, your personal research. If you're kind enough, maybe you can share some of your maybe cornerstone experiences that led you to this work and research and this project as well. And of course, we'll be talking about heart sense and collaborative inquiry, which are respectively your methodologies for research and this work that we're doing here. So I know many of our navigators and people listening will know about either or both of you, but I thought still would be nice to get to know you a little bit more. So maybe you can, have 5 minutes each, just sharing your story shortly and how you got into this field and into your fields of research, if you would be so kind. Maybe Louise, you can kick it off.
Shall I start? Okay. Right. I'll try and keep it very brief. I graduated from a business degree of all things back in 1995, and then started to work at the University of Birmingham. And I worked in the School of Electronic and Electrical Engineering, and I was supporting the undergraduates with industrial placements. So I was industrial liaison support. I absolutely loved doing that and working with the young people. And then after that, I retrained. So I retrained as a careers consultant and then ended up working in the careers service at Birmingham Uni for a few years. And then I was also at the same time dealing with personal physical problems, issues. So when I was 18, I had myocarditis, which left me with a pacemaker. So it was an enlargement of my heart muscle. I was left with a pacemaker, various complications, and I think everything came together as a perfect storm. This is in my early 30s, and I was feeling not very well physically. I felt that there was something missing in my life. I was going through marriage problems, personal issues, and I just felt that my whole life wasn't working in the way that I wanted it to work. And I didn't have the language to language what was happening to me. And then I had this revelatory experience. So I've shared this quite a few times on various other interviews, where I just woke up one morning and just thought, I don't want to be here anymore. Life is too hard. And then my heart, as I now understand it, was talking to me. So I then spent in fact, I've spent the time since then trying to work out what on earth happened to me in that revelatory moment. And that led me to, I gave up my job at the university. I studied complementary therapies. I moved house. I sold my house and went sort of traveling around the country, postgraduate study. I did a master's in holistic science at the Schumacher College, went on to do a PhD. And all the time underneath my heart, I feel, was guiding me to shift and change my life. The way that I was oriented in the world was shifting. So my whole ontology and epistemology shifted and has shifted really over the past 20 years. So fast forward to now, where I've got a doctorate in transformative learning. I developed the heart sense methodological framework, and I actually use that now with groups and with you, the NPNs, as an underpinning philosophy to meet and show up with one another and to open up to the something more, the something greater that I feel is guiding us all. So with heart sense and the heart sense approach, it's more about how we show up with one another than actual goals or outcomes, because how we show up through and with one another through ourselves actually holds what is actually going to come into being through our interconnection and our collaboration. So that's hopefully a short 5-minute little background on me and where I come from and why I do what I do, because I still love working with young people. And my whole reason for getting out of bed in the morning is to support people to flourish and to thrive and to be who they want to be in this lifetime.
Thank you, Louise. That's very beautiful. And dare I say something also, perhaps all the three of us share and many in the NPNs as well. I'll definitely want to expand heart sense, and I have a few questions of my own. Of course, I've been reading your book too, but I think there's so much depth and important essence in your work that's missing from today's, society and world sense. So we'll be coming back to that. But would you, Joan, also be kind to introduce yourself? And as I understand, you're leading or one of the co-leaders of the consciousness education project. So maybe you can open that a little bit as well for us.
Yeah, well, if I start at the beginning, I think the significant part of my journey is that I was born the daughter of missionaries. I was born in Kenya. And so I was brought up in a very kind of strict Christian tradition with very clear ideas of right and wrong, a very loving household. I was very loved by my parents. But I often felt they didn't really understand me because they didn't really understand why I didn't adhere to the whole Christian element, which I didn't do very well from the beginning. And when I was 16, I in fact walked out of confirmation classes and rejected the whole traditional religious side of life. On the other hand, I didn't go for science either. I wasn't interested in science at all because science was concerned, as I understood it then, with the material universe, with the physical universe, and I knew there was far more to life than matter. So I had this intuitive sense of something much more, but it wasn't explained to me through religion. So I rejected science, rejected religion, and what else was there? And so I was left in a bit of a limbo for a few years. It wasn't a huge deal at the time because I was a teenager. I was like 16, 17, 18, and too busy getting on with a social life. So this was just a kind of background uncertainty. And then when I was 19, I read Carl Jung's autobiography, Memories, Dreams, Reflections, and that was just like a revelation to me. Carl Jung had a similar religious background to me, and then the way he responded to that and entered into ideas of the unconscious, that was the way forward as far as I was concerned. So during my 20s, I went on what was actually kind of quite an isolating journey. I got into depth psychology, the active imagination. I started going into, through a kind of contemplative practice, being on my own, would get into a kind of altered state of consciousness and would start. I didn't call it automatic writing at the time, but it was like the writing was being channeled through me from some different dimension into words on paper, and I wouldn't actually realize what I'd written until I read them afterwards. I could understand Arthur Toynbee talks about the dangers of withdrawal and return, and I could, when I was withdrawn, it's like people talk about near-death experiences now, that they go somewhere and they don't want to return. They go to a place of peace and they're reluctant to return. And I understand that, because I would go somewhere and it would be very beautiful and peaceful, and I would just be writing this stuff, and it seemed a very smooth process, and I actually wouldn't want to come back and enter into a world that I was finding very difficult. But I realized even then that what I was learning to do was learning to be human. I wasn't very good at interacting in the world at all, and it felt like there was an impetus in me to learn how to be human and how to navigate this world better. So that was my internal world. Externally, at that time also, I had gone straight from school to work in residential childcare, and I was working with young people from 3 to 18 really, who had come from very deprived circumstances, very disadvantaged circumstances, and they were suffering. And so the question that raised in me is how is it possible for there to be any meaningful world when such suffering is possible? And this was a question that I was taking into my journaling as well. So the two became kind of quite entangled really. And I went into social work. I trained as a social worker, thinking that I could help these kids if I had the knowledge and skills to do it. And I would get that through training. And the training, from my perspective, was very inadequate. It didn't deal with any of the deeper stuff that I'd been encountered. It didn't even acknowledge that existed. And so, I'm shortcutting about 12 years of exploration here. I came to the conclusion that we were not going to get an answer to the suffering of young children or older children or anything that was going on in the world unless there was a transformation in consciousness. And that meant there had to be a transformation in what we understood by consciousness. So my interest in consciousness started at that stage. And also I moved from social work into education, because I thought we're not going to have the transformation in consciousness if people are not educated to think differently to what they do at the moment, if they're not educated to have a different kind of worldview. So that became a kind of key part of my life throughout, very much my own, because there weren't many people interested in consciousness. That has changed over the last 5+ about 5-10 years, certainly the last 5 years. There's suddenly become a kind of tsunami of interest in consciousness. So now it's almost becoming mainstream and trying to make it more so. And the consciousness education project that you're talking about, I mean, we can pick up more later, but just to introduce it, that I started that with Laurel Waterman, and then with Marjorie Woolacott, and Louise has become part of that. But they're basically bringing my two lifetime passions together: education and consciousness, and this belief that we're not going to deal with the many crises in this world until we have a different understanding and experience of consciousness.
I agree. And like you shared, I think it's most often the case that people come to this work, this kind of growth and awakening and change in their lives when they meet suffering, either in their own lives or somewhere close to them, like really close to them, that this kind of propels us to look inward, to start to search for answers, and to also enact, bigger and deeper change, qualitative change in the world. Sometimes, these altered states of consciousness can also trigger that. Sadly, that's not always the case, especially, a little bit further in the past, when these experiences, mystical and spiritual and religious, were kind of stigmatized, and people were afraid to share them or really look into them. So consciousness, you both mentioned consciousness and altered states of consciousness. I would say the way of us interacting, it's not that radical as it's usually perceived, but that also is an altered or slightly changed state of consciousness. And what I mean by that is, usually we are really stuck in our heads with our consciousness and attention, and also a certain part of our brain, if we really want to get technical. So altering that already kind of by definition takes us into an altered state of consciousness, and we can expand that consciousness, in all kinds of directions, into all kinds of levels, whether that's our own body, our wider part of our body, other than head, senses, of course, other people, through empathy, through listening, through the field we can talk about also later. And of course, when we talk about spiritual, religious, and mystical experiences, we can even expand our identity, our senses, our being into even wider reaches of reality, let's say. So let's maybe try to get the more technical things kind of out of the way, and then we can go deeper into each of your expertises and experiences, perhaps. Let's see where the conversation takes us. But something that I definitely wanted to open in this episode is the heart sense methodology. So that's, relevant to anyone who wants to engage with the NPNs, who wants to become part of the team or just part of the platform or community, because that's how we engage with each other on a fundamental level, and also collaborative inquiry, which is the kind of research and maybe developmental underpinning of this project as well. So who would like to go first?
Shall I start?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think Joan and I, come from quite different backgrounds, but what we realized when we started talking to one another is that when the way that we show up shares distinct similarities. And I think that's really the most important thing to say here. So with the heart sense methodological approach, it is, and this has been gifted to me in conversation with my heart. Now, that might sound strange to people who are listening, but my research allowed me the possibility to move into the active imaginal and active imagination space through depth psychology and through a specific methodology that was brought into being by a depth psychologist called Robert Ramanujan, who himself was very inspired by Carl Jung's work, and we've already spoken a little to Carl Jung already. So this idea that there was something that my heart wanted me to know. I was having physical complications, physical issues with my heart. And what I didn't want to do was pathologize what was happening with my heart and just leave it in that space, in a kind of very narrow, materialistic, physical space. I knew there was something more to what was happening to me in my own personal life, in my health journey. So that was why and it was all combined with me starting to think about the world differently. Why was I feeling so, why was the world feeling so narrow to me? Why were there no answers? There were things outside of everyday experience that were happening, and I didn't have a framework or any language to put it in. So again, Joan's spoken a little bit to this in her own personal experience, but I just wanted to give a little bit more content to where I was showing up in relation to my heart and the heart sense methodology. So with all that said, I found an approach that allowed me to question more deeply what had happened to me in terms of my revelatory experience, this experience that I didn't want to pathologize with my heart. I heard my heart speaking to me, saying to me that I was creating conflict in my own life. How was I creating conflict in my own life? What was this voice saying to me? And like Joan, I've had to condensate or sort of condense about 20 years into 2 minutes, which is quite difficult to do. But essentially, it's this sense that there is something more beyond what we are enculturated or programmed into understanding through our education. That the world isn't just physical, that there is so much more beyond what we are allowed to perceive or what we're allowed to bring into our ordinary everyday frameworks of speaking and knowing. And so Robert Ramanujan's methodology allowed me to have a conversation with my heart, because I knew my heart was important in all of this work through transference dialogues. And so I spent 5 years in deep conversation with my heart, learning to listen to my heart, hear my heart, what my heart was saying to me. And it was very different to what my ordinary mind chatter was saying to me every day. And so I could research this. I could start to compare and contrast what was happening in terms of modern day head-based, mind-based framework, physicalist, materialist framework, and what my heart was saying to me, which was expansive, open, allowing me to bring more of my lived experience into the conversation. So in terms of the methodology was actually gifted to me through the transference dialogues, through the conversations that I had with my heart, which I was then able to distill into 7 steps. And those 7 steps are basically based on how my heart showed up for me as I was conversing with my heart. Open to me, the possibility of me exploring things that are beyond generally allowed conversation and frameworks. Holding me with kindness, compassion, respect. Digging deeper into those conversations. So it would be like a spiraling loop where my heart would meet me without any preconceived ideas of where I was headed. And then I started to get a sense of there's something else occurring between me and my heart. There's something else happening in this space, which was allowing, enabling. And so it just felt like I was part of a wider intelligence, a wider mode of being in the world, in the relational space. It wasn't just me, it was me and my heart, and it was me in relationship with something greater as well that I haven't defined. I haven't defined what this something greater is. I don't think we need to, but it was just the fact that my heart allowed me the possibility to bring in a lot of my lived experience that I actually before this time wasn't able to, through a very narrow framework of knowing. So heart sense distilled and very simplistically is showing up in the space with myself as open as I can be in the space and holding that space open for another so that they can flourish and they can thrive too, without reducing it into preconceived ideas or judgments or solutions. Staying open, maybe sitting in silence for quite a long time and just allowing the space to have its way with you. And also because the heart, I believe, has these benevolent qualities baked into itself anyway, it would be that we are showing up in and through our hearts in a place of non-judgment, radical acceptance, deep reverence for oneself and another. Just not expecting any answers, as I've said before. So it's the way that we show up with one another as well, without closing down myself or another in any relationship. And it's not easy to do. It has this work has its challenges. And especially if you're working with someone who isn't used to this work, it's quite hard for them to kind of gather sometimes the nuance or the subtleness of this work. But there are very simple underlying principles, which I hope I've just outlined for you. And now I can hand over to Joan, because collaborative inquiry actually also contains those underpinning philosophies.
Thanks, Louise. And I think one thing that strikes me as I'm listening to Louise, and I think it's really important in some way, is that Louise and I connect very deeply. We have very deep conversations and have some agreement that we connect in some way to the same kind of reality, but our words and our languages and how we've come here are so totally different. You know, I think if you just listened to our words and our stories, you'd think that we could have nothing in common. And I think it's really important to understand that there's a reality beyond the words, and that we're all discovering this reality in our own different, unique ways. And it's important to listen and pay attention to what's going on and what we're trying to say beyond those words. And I think Louise and I have had some practice in that, and I've enjoyed doing so also. So I will say about collaborative inquiry, and I'll say it in the context of the NPNs, if that's all right, because I think it's good to relate it to what we're here for. Because again, when Louise and I first started talking about this, we had a shared concern, and that is the challenges facing young people that was not of their making, and that was being perpetuated and increased by older generations. And I know that I also was being motivated. I had a really tough time in my 20s. It was not fun. I was going through this journey. I was doing it on my own, and I wouldn't want any young person to engage in that kind of deep spiritual journey on their own. On the other hand, if you just throw out a kind of come and join us on this spiritual journey, it's not going to attract many people because they don't know what it's about. And so we were concerned about the real issues facing young people, the difficulties in getting employment, it's not so easy to buy your own house now as it was when I was younger. University education doesn't get paid for. People get into immense debt if they go to university. And linked to all of this, I'm sure, are growing mental health problems. So people in the late teens, 20s, even early 30s, they're really kind of struggling. Many were struggling to kind of see any point or purpose or meaning to life, because the materialist worldview that we're presented with says we're all a chance accident. So within that, it is quite difficult to see what the meaning to life is. So we agreed that we wanted to do something about this, and so we thought, how do we best connect with young people? And the principle was, let's connect with where they're at. So let's identify some of the challenges that young people are playing and or facing, and then invite them to come to talk about that, and then we would start to explore the kind of roots of that, and then that would take us into kind of deeper ways of seeing things. And the reason why I proposed collaborative inquiry to complement Louise's heart sense approach is because I see life as inquiry. Actually, I don't have the answers. You know, I'm the age I am now, and I think I know as little about what the purpose of life is as I was when I was 18 in concrete form. I think I've learned a lot more about life and about how it works. And there's a coherence to life that I certainly didn't experience when I was in my 20s. But in terms of having answers, I just don't have them. I think you know, everybody is here for a different reason, and I think what we lack is the place for people to meet and have these kind of discussions, to ask a question and be able to explore for themselves in a safe setting what they understand life to be about, what their experiences have, where those experiences take them without imposing any belief system or any particular way of understanding the world on them, that this should emerge from people together. Collaborative inquiry is based on the form of cooperative inquiry, which is created by John Heron, who was a transpersonal psychologist. Was in the humanist school in the 1960s. He actually died 2 or 3 years ago, aged 94, and was very active to the end. And basically, he created cooperative inquiry as a means of a group of people coming together to explore any aspect of the human condition. And I can say more about the actual methodology later on if you want more of that. But we weren't doing a pure form of cooperative inquiry. We were taking some of the essential elements and bringing that into the NPNs, inviting people to meet with us and to inquire with us about some of the questions that were critical to them. Again, we didn't want to impose any of those questions. We wanted to create the space for young people to inquire together. So that in conjunction with Heart Sense was how we approached it, and that was the basis of the choice for collaborative inquiry.
I think it's genius in a way we can't even quite articulate, but something that I have discussed with some friends recently regarding the issues we face today, the choices we have to make, is, for example, regarding our, you know, calling and our skill sets and our work or jobs. In one way, a person could specialize, you know, go deeper into a skill set, a field, and, you know, hone themselves for a certain job or a position. And in so doing, maybe make sure that they have, you know, some kind of stability for the next, let's say, 5 years. Hard to say about 10 years, but let's say 5 years. It works in a sense, like you have a plan, you have a vision, you work towards it, and of course you get some stability out of it. But in another way, if we look at the world today, by kind of locking yourself into a trajectory, into a path for the next 5 years, or maybe more if you have to properly learn for it, you won't be able to acquire perhaps any other skill sets that might be necessary for you to keep on going after the next 5 years. So in that sense, we're in a kind of a paradoxical situation where we do need to go. We can't stay in the same spot as life requires of us. But at the same time, if we aren't flexible enough or able to react or change our trajectory, let's say fast enough, then we are, you know, not adapting fast enough to the requirements of the environment we are in. So that's kind of one of the issues everyone is facing today, that the environment is changing so rapidly that, you know, we can't really plan ahead too much. We have to be quite adaptive and flexible. And in that sense, I think the collaborative inquiry and the heart sense both are genius, in the sense that we come here around, issues, challenges, and questions, because there aren't, like you said, Joan, there aren't answers. Like, even if we wanted to, even if we did our best, the answers, other than maybe the most kind of essential humanist questions, aren't going to stick, or aren't going to give us perhaps the results we want, or the sustenance or the stability we want. So instead, we have to live into the questions and kind of distribute our cognition, our creativity, inspiration, also perhaps just kind of thinking entrepreneurially, also the interests and the challenges that we have, because that's in essence what people are willing to exchange value for. That is what is valued, the solutions, or the act of trying to solve the problems that we have, which aren't the problems that our, the previous generations had. Any comments on that?
Lots, actually, Rima. Are you okay if I just as you were talking, I think what was coming through very clearly for me was this sense of not fixing around solutions or answers, that actually life is living. What I've learned in and through my heart, and this actually, I do need to give a shout out to Johann Wolfgang von Goethe as well, and his approach to scientific inquiry. Although he's known as just a poet in our materialist worldview, he was actually a kind of a beautiful poetic scientist that was exploring color and plants and how they grew, how they morphed into the shape that they morphed into because of the environment that they were living in. Everything for him was relational, and so I spent a long time with Goethe's approach and his method of inquiry whilst I was at Schumacher College. And I remember thinking when I was doing my PhD that actually his approach actually was deeply inspirational for the heart sense approach, which is being with.
Mm-hmm.
Being still, being in the present moment, deeply listening. Are we listening and attending? Joan said this a couple of times today. Are we paying attention and listening to what is arising right now in this living, breathing moment? Not only in ourselves, but with each other. And actually, what is the space demanding of us as well? It's a complex network of interconnected relationships when we are in this space. So what I wanted to come in with really when you were sharing your reflections based on what Joan was sharing was that when I had that revelatory moment, I knew that my whole world would never be the same again. And there was something living through me. There was something asking something greater of me. And in that moment, my whole materialist worldview fell apart. I didn't even know who I was, where I was, but I didn't have the language to language what was happening to me into being. And I think that's what Heart Sense does. It holds, my students have said this, there's a container now, there's a framework now that allows people to bring in all or as much of their lived experience as possible without casting aside things that don't fit, bringing it in, sitting with it, opening to the possibility of what that might be. And in that sense, guidance arises in and through the sitting with. So the direction is actually baked into how we choose, how we attend, how we sit in the moment with ourselves and with each other. it's genius, really. You've used that word, genius, but I am still in awe of this work, and I just bring it through. I am taught by my heart and by the greater intelligence of which I am a part. And I believe that I'm always guided by something greater than me. I don't give it a definition, I don't tie it down, but there is something greater than me that is leading me onwards in and through my life. And I let go into that, and it's scary. And I let go into that when I had that revelatory moment. I sold my house. I went off and did postgraduate study in my 40s. Nobody understood why I was doing what I was doing. And yet now I look back and I think I wouldn't have changed a thing. And I am doing what I love to do every single day of my life. And it's kind of like living backwards into something that has got me.
And yeah, can I kind of add to, well, I was going to say it's not say something also, which I'm always fascinated by the different words we use and yet the shared meaning. So I'll use my own language, which is very different, but I feel very much in tune with what Louise is saying. I haven't said what I think what my ontology is, what consciousness is. So I'm just going to say what I understand and how I experience it. I experience consciousness to be infinite and eternal, to have the core qualities of love and creativity, and to have intelligence. It just is and always has been. I know that relates to some of the spiritual traditions, especially Eastern, and I know some people might call it God. I don't, because that has so many meanings and misconceptions. So I stay with the experience of this infinite and eternal reality, core qualities of love, creativity, and has intelligence. And I just feel I am within that infinite and eternal reality. And I also think that my explanation for our human journey is that we are that infinite and eternal reality seeking to express itself in a different form, almost as a kind of challenge. See if we can express those qualities of love and creativity purely in material form. And I feel that is what I am here to do. But I am an expression of that wider reality, and it is there with me all the time. So that's where, relating to Louise, just listening in all the time to what that wider reality is saying to me. I don't think anything is ever lost. So I think contained with that is every single human experience that's been. So on a very personal level, I have lost, a partner who's my soulmate, and many people I've been close to, my parents. I feel they're there. I feel their presence there, and the presence of all who have been here and have been learning about this human journey. And that the more open I am, the more I am able to be guided by their learning and their wisdom and become part of that, what I call an evolution of consciousness that we're all involved in. But that means staying in the present moment always. You can have an idea of where you might be going, but be prepared to change it, because something might happen right now at this moment in time to say, no, you should be doing something different. So I am always aware of that and seeking guidance and listening to that guidance and seeking to respond from that place. So I think that's where Louise and we experience it a bit differently. We verbalize it differently, but there is something really connected about what we feel about this present moment, both how we're guided about ourselves and how we connect in and relate to each other. And I'll go back to inquiry. I think to be doing all of this in the spirit of inquiry, we're learning about what it means to be human. We're learning about what we need to do, and we take it from there.
I love that. Something that I wanted to come back to and have kind of jotted down some keywords for myself also is about cognition and ideas and consciousness and creativity and inspiration. These are also some of my favorite topics throughout my life. Something that I've been looking into through my own experience, and also literature and let's say altered states of consciousness as well. Oh, and also I wanted to propose, I'm trying to kind of change my own wording as well as I go, because the altered state is already kind of an old word. It's not altered. It's saying altered implies that that there is kind of a normal or regular way of consciousness. I would rather use expanded consciousness. I think that's more precise. But something that I wanted to perhaps also bring in is the realization that, or maybe the question that, where do thoughts come from? Where does inspiration come from? Where do solutions come from, or any kind of knowing? Just going a little bit ahead, I don't think it's the mind, the mind or the headspace mostly, for me, seems to be a filter of all the information and motivations around us and inside of us too, I guess. So talking about the heart space, talking about the creative intelligence, I think that's, since dreaming is also a topic kind of close to my heart, and dreams, I think this expanded consciousness is how we get at least better, at least more novel or more useful answers to the questions or the challenges that we might be having, and we can expand our consciousness individually. That's something that's been my interest also, and how to do that, and how to make it kind of practical or operational, but also by coming together in a certain way, which is what you both shared, these two methodologies to come together around a problem, a question, a reality of one's life. In this way, in this group container, in this coming together, we, for a moment, expand or merge our individual consciousness, and of course, if anyone has gone deep enough into psychology, we'll also know that there are resources, parts within us that are so much more deep and wise and rich than our everyday kind of waking consciousness, which is basically like a little palette that's colored throughout the days and throughout our senses and what we consume and hear and see. So trying to come to that space, ideally regularly, is just so healing, inspiring, and
Can I just
forward
make
moving
one
and
comment?
pulling too. Sure.
Sorry, can I just make one response to the words that you've used, altered and expanded, because I think they're both valid at different times. So I think in my 20s, I definitely went into what I would call an altered state of consciousness, because I was very much in this world, dealing with all the struggles and feeling very isolated, etc. And then I would go through a process, and it would be a little bit like, going through the wardrobe doors into Narnia. I would be going through a process that would take me into a very different state of consciousness. And I would call that an altered state of consciousness. And I didn't necessarily understand what was happening at the time. I was experiencing it but it was a little bit like I was in two different universes.
Mm.
I was having to come back and try and make sense of one with the other. Whereas now I would absolutely agree with you. I mean, I'm not quite sure how the process evolved over time, but I would say I live with an expanded state of consciousness, like, kind of permanently. My attention is not just, I feel quite separate from this physical world in many ways, and living my life in that expanded consciousness, relating it to my life in this physical world. I realize I'm not wording that very well, but I just wanted to differentiate. I think those are two important words, and I think they're both valid at different times for different reasons. I don't know what your view on that is, Louise.
You've got me thinking now. As you were talking, Remo, I don't tend to use the word consciousness a lot, and Joan and I talk a lot about this, in my own work. I understand consciousness as being a kind of way, a mode of awareness that for me arises in and through my heart as an organ of knowing. So this is probably something that needs to be outlined here at this point, that my heart for me is an organ of knowing. It's a place of perception, of receiving the world. And for me, that is consciousness. That is where whatever we are part of, this mode of awareness is arising in and through my heart. So yes, for me, when I receive the world in and through my heart and focus my attention there, everything is expanded, because actually I'm not part of a very narrow framework of materialism that doesn't allow half of my lived experience. So for me, in and through my heart, when I experience the world there and I place my locus of attention there constantly and consistently, it's been a practice over 20 years. So that's expanded consciousness, expanded awareness for me. Altered states of consciousness do happen to me occasionally, so I guess I would agree with you in part, and they tend to happen for me in my dream time. But for me, dreams, deep knowing, intuition are all deeper ways of knowing that actually arise in and through my heart as well. And there's a particular heart that understands or has a framework that can contain what arises and what information and conversations arise for me through dreams. So I've had experiences where I felt like I'm flying in space, and I felt the wind. I felt wind against my cheeks, my face, as I'm flying in my dream state. So that for me is altered states of consciousness. I suppose what I'm saying is my heart gives me the possibility to have a more expanded experience of being human and the edges of that, and moving more into the mysteries of that. So that's where I come from in my own experience, in and through my heart as an organ of knowing.
Well, listening to both of you, I guess one of the differentiators between the two of them could be the closeness or the connection with your physical body. And if I try to think about some kind of development or growth in a spiritual practical sense, it is to try to expand the consciousness from the body to the place of the altered consciousness. Also, if we can keep them both in our awareness, that's pretty dope. but of course, if our consciousness is transported to a wholly different place, spectrum of reality, sphere of reality, then yes, of course, that could be called altered state of consciousness. But at the same time, if you go into psychiatry or pharmacology, then being tripped out on amphetamines could also be an altered state of consciousness. So that's kind of I feel more like a medical term rather than this kind of shamanic sensibility or function that we have through our, we could say consciousness, we could say soul as well. we could use awareness or attention.
Yeah, I think what I'd like to just say as well here, Remo, is that the heart sense work, and I have a sense of collaborative inquiry doing the same thing, is that they both open to possibility and potentiality. Nothing is off the table. Everything is sat with. And that doesn't mean that we lose critical reflection. We actually find that we become more rigorously critical when you are allowed the possibility to bring things that don't necessarily fit onto the table. Because we are not automatically bracketing out or reaching for solutions or narrowing down.
Yeah, some terms I sometimes hear you use, Louise, is our little selves and perhaps our bigger selves. I think what we're doing in the NPN spaces is try to give space for both, try to invite our bigger selves in, but also taking really good care of our smaller selves.
Yeah, exactly.
Something that I really like that you both alluded to was also, through this project and through these spaces, and perhaps the courses we are beginning to put together, we are trying to give room for people or for souls, to come into form, into bodies, for all these lovely gifts that we have. We talked about suffering a little bit, the challenges we are facing. I think we all have these gifts, within our souls, maybe from the spirit, our little sparks of consciousness that are trying to come through, that are trying to take root in these kind of what I've come to call also body consciousnesses, because that is also another reality to our being. We are inhabiting this culture, this the genes, the inherited experience and trauma also within our bodies, that through these spaces we are more able to get in touch with those gifts and that deeper knowing and those deeper pulls, as well as maybe quieter whispers.
Yeah. I mean, I often say in my work, Remo, is listening deeply to what's claiming you. Listening deeply in and through your heart as to what's claiming you, what's calling you forward. It might make no rational sense from a kind of left brain hemisphere take on the world. But actually, I've discovered that when I listen deeply and really focus on what is claiming me, what's my body asking of me? What do I feel like doing? And again, this takes time. But when we listen more in and through our lived experience as to what's unfolding for us, generally speaking, we are guided in the right direction. But again, it takes time to learn this. These are subtle, very ancient ways that we have deep within us, that we've had since the beginning of our human species, since before language. These are ways that we engage with the world and its unfolding. And so I guess through my work is I'm opening a possibility for people to re-experience that in their own way, using their own language, in and through their own hearts.
Yes, you used the word spiral when you were sharing about the heart sense. I think that's also very poignant to our journey. There is the direction, but the spiral doesn't go in the middle. It goes around and around, but it also doesn't only circulate, it does move. So I think that has to do with our navigation also. We take a direction, but we can't go in a straight line. We have to go in circles and really learn, really grow into what we are becoming.
And that's a key aspect of collaborative inquiry as well, because if you go back to John Heron's cooperative inquiry, there's a kind of cyclical process. It's a form of action research, actually. And so you start with your experience. So in our collaborative inquiry, we start with the experience of each of us. There's the freedom for individuals to share what they experience, what they feel, what they think, just what's going on for them, and that can be as different as you like. You then move on to reflection, so you reflect together on the significance. This is where deep listening comes in, as Louise says, and deep listening and as a group evolves, there's deep sharing. So and there's no fear of the silence, because a lot goes on in the silence also. And once you've had the sharing, you start trying to make sense of that. So that's when the conceptualization or the theory, what's actually going on here? How do we understand life differently as a result of what we've experienced and what we've shared? And then we talk together about what kind of difference that makes in our lives, how we're going to individually and collectively go back into the world and perhaps be different or think differently, do differently. And then you're back to the experience again. So in the collaborative inquiry, you're doing that when you come and meet together, going through that sharing of experience, reflecting, theorizing, thinking of better ways of doing things, back to the experience, but you're never back to the same experience. So that's where the cyclical thing comes. When you come back to the experience, you're coming back to the same idea of experience, but at a different level that's informed by the learning and the sharing. So that is the essence of John Heron's cooperative inquiry, and that is the kind of process that we've taken in and pick up on with the collaborative inquiry. So it's really this form of a cyclical process is really very important to that process.
Yeah, that's exactly where I was going to go next and ask you about it. So it's iterative and constructive, but also embodied. Yeah.
That's heart sense too. As Joan was speaking, I was thinking, those are all the steps of heart sense, which just we're using different language. So you can see why they complement each other so beautifully.
Yeah, I was in for my master's thesis, I was also using intuitive inquiry, which is, I think, predicated on the same process. Hard to say how it really differs. It just adds maybe a process of intuition to the beginning of the process, or to even kind of specifying the problem or finding the question or issue of the research. But as you were speaking, I was also reminded of dragon dreaming, which we have been using, which is also founded on the same processes, kind of sensibilities, group consciousness or wisdom, and also aims to bring that to real world impact through ourselves, of course, our own process and growth, but also through some kind of service, through some kind of change we are trying to enact in the world.
They're all expressions of learning. They're all different ways of learning. And of course, we could take all of them back to David Kolb and his learning circle, which is experience, reflection, theorization, testing out new ideas and practice. And that is the essence of the learning circle. It's a very simple model, and I tend to carry it, have done for a long time. And then you take that and you move it into different forms, into heart sense, into cooperative inquiry, into intuitive inquiry. It'll all develop and evolve in different ways. But we're really talking about different ways of learning, and that's what the human journey is about. It's about learning how to be better humans, hopefully.
Well, that's exactly the point I wanted to pick up on, really, is that with all of these methodologies, and there are probably an infinite number of more similar ones, it's about what's demanded of us, each and every one of us, because I think there's an underpinning thread here. It's how we are showing up with these methodologies with ourselves in the relational space with another. So we're not, it's a learning journey, but we are involved in the learning journey. We're involved, as Joan says, in, we could go back to Jung and look at, well, this is the learning journey. This is the individuation journey. This is us learning to become whole, learning who we are in the relational space with another being. So my heart very often says to me, Louise, it's how you show up in the relational space with yourself for others. So I'm included in that. I'm not giving my power away. I am responsible for how I show up in the relational space. And I do that in and through my heart, under my heart's guidance, trying to be as the best person I can be in every living moment. And in every living moment, I'm going to do differently. We are human beings. We're going to make a mess sometimes. But then also taking responsibility for how I show up in that space. What could I have done differently? How did I show up in that space that might have affected another person? And is that other person actually thinking about the way that they showed up with themselves and for me in the same way? So the relationship, that relationality goes both ways. And this is where I was saying right at the beginning, this work is not easy. It is deeply, deeply subtle, very complex, but this is what underpins the entirety of the NPN project through collaborative inquiry and heart sense. And this is how we are asking everyone who is part of the NPN project to kind of take this up as a commitment. There's no sages on stages. We are learning how to be with ourselves and each other in the best possible way so that we can enable ourselves and each other and the world to flourish and to thrive. That's a big ask. But we're trying to do this and explore what that means, living with a great deal of uncertainty in and through the NPN project.
And to provide each other with support as we go along, because I think that's one of the biggest benefits, that we are with others who are engaged in a similar journey. We might be experiencing it in different ways, but we can share those different experiences. And going back to where I started, really, in a safe setting where we know that who we are and how we're doing it is accepted, is completely and warmly and beautifully accepted, even though it's doing it differently to someone else. There's no judgment in that respect.
Yeah, all it takes is a little bit of courage, a little bit of faith, and trust, and willingness also to change, to grow, to transform.
Yeah.
If I may kind of conclude this last part, so in essence, it's the kind of underlying mechanism is basically how science is done, how we come to knowledge, how we come to learning, but how it differs from contemporary, let's say, materialist science is, number one, it's embodied. We are, as the kind of researcher or the participant, we are part of the process. Yeah, we aren't coming kind of detached. We aren't coming as authority or guru or even object. We are part of the process, and so from the beginning till the end. Also, how it differs is we are using not just our five senses, but we are using, let's say, a deeper listening capacity, as well as not just listening, but a level of empathy. That's where Goethe comes in, as well as our prehistoric culture. We are, before we had science, this kind of very linear way of thinking and very fast-paced progress. Our knowledge, our wisdom came from people going into caves, going into altered and expanded states of consciousness with their questions, issues, problems, health-related or societal, and coming back with answers, coming back with medicine, either for themselves, their communities, or the ecology at large. So we are also trying to tap into those kind of let's say, latent powers that have actually accompanied us longer than science has in contemporary sense. And then the ways of relating also, which has to do with authenticity, non-judgment, safety, discernment. That's kind of the cardinal value. And also, finally, I would say impact, although that's maybe hard to measure in a final sense. If we are the kind of product of this process, then the impact may stretch out to generations to come. So, but that's also something we are, at least me personally, definitely, I'm trying to hold a philosophy of pragmatism and some kind of practicality in the back of my mind and heart too. All right, we have done a little bit over an hour. I think we ought to start concluding. But since we talked so much about education and transformation and our journeys, I thought we might tease or bring in a little bit what we are building right now as well in the form of the school platform and kind of perhaps also the wider trajectory. So I thought I'd also ask Joan, maybe you can tease us a little bit about what you're doing in the consciousness education project so far. How is it going so far, and what kind of maybe sub projects are tied to it, or any kind of interesting developments you'd like to share yourself for excitement?
Yeah, of course. I mean, the consciousness education project has now just come to the end of its second year. We're coming to the end of, we were funded for the second year by the Salvia Foundation. We actually did a webinar on it last Thursday. So if it's appropriate, I'd be very happy for you to have a link to that webinar as part of this podcast, because that's an hour and a half where basically we give the background to it, and we spotlight 4 different projects, which include Louise's. So Louise has a slot in that about her Heart Sense project. The title of the Salvia founded part is the Global Expansion of Consciousness Education, a 1-year pilot project. And we are genuinely expanding globally. We've got, apart from the 8 projects that form the formal part of what we started with, we have someone called Alison Paradise leading a project in Los Angeles with young people. We've recently, Alison and myself have recently been to the University of Puget Sound, where there's a program there led by George Irvin with undergraduates on consciousness, creativity and meaning. And we're talking about how his work becomes integrated in the project. And yeah, there's a lot of exciting developments going on globally. So it's quite exciting times for that. But if those who are interested would like to watch the webinar that we did last week, it will really give people the opportunity to update themselves on what's happening in that project and to sign up and become interested. We've also got a brand new website, which is www.consciousnesseducation.net. And through that, people have the opportunity to sign up and get involved in the development of it as it moves forward. So we'd obviously welcome anyone in the NPNs and listening to this podcast to do that.
Thank you, Joan. Good to hear that, and tailwind to that project. I'm fully behind it with my heart, and I'll definitely include the links in the description for anyone who's interested. And on that topic, Louise, would you like to include any links, any projects, anything you would like to shout out to?
Well, there's our project, isn't there, Remo? So the NPN project as it goes into phase 4. So we've been going 4 years now. Can't quite believe that. We've got a really great team of young people between the ages of 18 and 35 who are involved in this project. Everyone and anyone between the ages of 18 to 35 is very, very welcome. If they've liked what they've heard, what they've seen, I would, and also you would as well, Remo, encourage them to come to the New Paradigm Navigators .community website. And so if you could put those links in the description, that would be great. And there's also our school platform, isn't there, Remo? So we've got a project coming together now, where in September there's going to be a kind of living classroom, a 12-month journey for people between the ages of 18 to 35 that will be coming together, collaborating, inquiring in and through their hearts, having full moon circles, new moon direction setting, master classes, all kinds of things. So it's going to be really exciting, kicking off in September. You, myself, and 6 other NPNs are coming together to dream this next phase into being. To use your term, Remo, dream. We have no preconceived ideas at the moment. It's a living being that's coming into being through the team that's gathering. So all and everyone is welcome. So if you can pop those descriptions and links into below the video, Remo, I'd be really, really grateful.
Thank you, Louise. I guess I'll add as much as we know so far. The in the widest sense, the topics are or themes are related to the issues the young people, the next generation is facing today. The area of connection between science and spirituality, but of course, more than content, we are oriented to certain directions of development and way of coming together and spaces for our kind of holistic development. So that's spaces for heart, spaces for mind, and research, perhaps even maybe even incubation or experimentation, could be projects tied to it. And what I also wanted to say about kind of education before was that it is so lovely to be building this project in today's time when we have so little friction between connection in a global sense, that we could, for example, come together around a question, around a shared issue, and we could, build projects. We could reach out to people who have expertise in that field. We could invite them over to come and share their expertise or share their questions or their journey or their experiences in that topic or regarding that issue. So really it's a collaborative space of heart and consciousness and really open inquiry and incubation. So anyone who is interested, I'll be sharing the links down below, and don't hesitate to reach out to us. We have socials, we have an email, we'll be having more email addresses shortly for the whole team, and this is a project in development. So if anything has inspired you, if you have ideas to share or even collaborations to offer, then again, don't hesitate to contact us and let's have some fun.
Yeah, and I just wanted to give a shout out as well for the Scientific and Medical Network, who has been our, sort of greatest champion and sponsor really over the last 4 years. So, the New Paradigm Navigators project would not have happened without the sort of generous support of the Scientific and Medical Network. So yeah, just thanking them, and maybe you could pop the link to the SMN and membership and a little bit about what they do underneath. That would be wonderful. But one final thing, Remo, I know you've been asking us questions, but what I'd really like to hear from you is just a couple of sentences on what the NPN project has meant to you, because you've been there from the beginning, haven't you? So, what does this space really mean to you in terms of everything that Joan and I have shared and our vision that we came together with? If you could speak to that.
Well, it's
a couple
been
of sentences.
yeah.
Seems to be a challenge.
Tears, joy, growth, realization, individuation. If I just have to find a few keywords, really it has been a realization of many of my dreams that I've been dreaming since I've started to think to myself, as well as finding new dreams worthy of devoting myself to, finding meaning, purpose, outlet, a canvas, community, even sangha, perhaps. And a really, really, great, beautiful, exciting way to spend my life, my hours, and creativity. That's what it's been so far.
That warms my heart, and it definitely brings a smile to each of our faces.
Absolutely.
Because you are the living expression of our dream when we came together. So
It's true.
if anyone has been inspired by this talk and inspired by you, Rima, because you're a new paradigm navigator and you're the living expression of mine and Joan's dream. So come and join the community, because there is so much to experience, to build, to develop, to grow. And this is where you will thrive and flourish.
Yeah, every meeting, every community meeting, I come away with fire in my eyes and in my soul. It's just doesn't even matter what we're doing. Like recently, if I'm thinking about what motivates me, it's like it's not even a mission or purpose anymore. I have those inherently. Now it's the people that I'm surrounded with. And really it doesn't matter what we're doing, what's the project, what's the issue at hand, or how we do it. It's about the people I get to meet and how we meet each other. That's the inspiration, really. And I can't put into words how grateful and honored I am to be a part of that. So
wonderful.
Thank you from the bottom of my heart.
It's really wonderful.
Grateful for you, Rima.
And thank you for this conversation.
Yeah,
it's been enjoyable.
Wonderful. Thank you.
I hope there's many more to come, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Until the next time, listeners, I hope you enjoyed.